you were taught, probably by someone who loved you, probably while holding a trowel, that those small, dark, crumbly piles on top of your soil are a mess, a nuisance, a sign that something has gone wrong in your lawn. You were told to rake them away, to smooth them out, to brush them off the patio before guests arrived. Maybe, if you were unlucky, you were told they were droppings to be disgusted by. Maybe you were told they ruined the look of a tidy garden. Almost certainly, you were told they didn't matter. All of that is wrong. Every part of it, the mess, the shame, the brushing away. What you have been sweeping off your boots, your stone paths, and your grass for most of your life is not a waste. It is not dirt out of place. It is the single most concentrated, most biologically active, most agriculturally valuable substance produced by any animal on land. And the small creature making them, the one most of us were taught to either ignore or pity, has been quietly running the engineering project that keeps your garden, your farms, and arguably your civilization alive. These are earthworm castings, and the misconception around them may be one of the oldest and most expensive lies in gardening. To understand why so many of us were taught to fear or dismiss these tiny towers, you have to go back further than the gardening magazines of the 20th century. You have to go back to the Victorian lawn. In 19th century Britain, a new aesthetic ideal took hold among the wealthy. The perfectly smooth billiard table lawn. It was a status symbol. It signaled wealth, leisure, and control over nature. And the small, crumbly mounds left by earthworms on the surface of the grass, what gardeners called worm casts, became quite suddenly an enemy. Whole industries were built around removing them, rolling them flat, poisoning them. Treatises were written on how to eradicate worms entirely from a respectable estate. That cultural panic traveled. It crossed oceans. It seeped into suburban America, where the post-war lawn became its own kind of religion, and anything interrupting that flat green surface, clover, dandelions, mushrooms, worm castings, was reframed as a defect. There is a deep historical irony here, because in 1881, the very same Victorian century that declared war on worm casts also produced the book that should have ended the war. Charles Darwin's final published work was not about finches, or evolution, or the origin of species. It was about earthworms. It was titled The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms. And in it, after 40 years of patient observation in his own garden, Darwin made a claim so startling that most readers simply did not believe him. He claimed that the soil itself, the topsoil under every meadow and forest in England, had been built, particle by particle, by the digestive tracts of worms. The science was there. The culture refused it. And so the casting, the very evidence of Darwin's claim, was reclassified in the public mind as litter. The price of that misclassification is difficult to overstate, because it has been paid almost entirely underground where nobody could see it. When gardeners spent the 20th century raking, rolling, and chemically treating their lawns to flatten castings, they were not just removing a cosmetic feature. They were removing the surface signature of a soil ecosystem in good health. In agricultural fields, the same logic, combined with deep tillage and broad-spectrum pesticides, drove earthworm populations down by, in some studies, more than 80% compared with undisturbed land. Entire watersheds lost their primary soil engineers. What followed was not dramatic. It was quiet. Soil compacted. Water infiltration slowed. Rains that should have soaked into the ground ran off the surface, taking topsoil with them. Crop yields needed more and more synthetic input to stay level. And the simple, free, biological machinery that had built fertile land for millions of years was replaced, at enormous cost, by trucks, tanks, and chemistry. We lost something else, too. We lost the habit of looking down. We lost the intuition that the small, ordinary, slightly inconvenient features of our gardens might be the most important ones. Castings were the easiest case to make. They sat right there on the surface, asking to be noticed. And for over a century, we mostly chose not to. The reversal began, slowly, in the second half of the 20th century, when soil scientists started measuring what was actually inside those small mounds. The work was unglamorous. Researchers in the Netherlands, in India, in New Zealand, in the American Midwest, began collecting castings from fields and forests, drying them, and running them through the same analyses used for premium agricultural fertilizers. The results, when they came in, were so consistent across continents that they almost sounded like a mistake. By the 1980s, a new field had crystallized around these findings. It is called vermiculture, and its applied side, vermicomposting, is now taught in agriculture universities, from Cornell to Bangalore. Farmers who had once paid to remove worms were now paying to import them. Municipalities began running worm-based composting facilities to process food waste, and the small mounds that Victorian gentlemen had tried to erase from their lawns were quietly reclassified in the scientific literature as one of the most efficient nutrient cycling products on Earth. The lie did not die quickly. It is still being told in some gardening books. But a turning point has happened, and once you see what the castings actually are, it is very hard to ever see them as a mess again. What we now know is that an earthworm casting is not waste in any meaningful sense. It is processed soil. The worm ingests a mouthful of dirt, leaf litter, fungal threads, and microbes. That mixture passes through a muscular gizzard, where it is ground against tiny mineral particles the worm has swallowed for exactly this purpose. Then it moves through an intestine lined with glands that secrete enzymes, mucus, and a population of symbiotic bacteria. What comes out the other end is chemically, structurally, and biologically transformed. Compared to the surrounding soil, a fresh casting typically contains around 5 times more available nitrogen, 7 times more available phosphorus, and 11 times more available potassium. Those are not marginal differences. Those are the same 3 nutrients listed on every commercial fertilizer bag in the world, and the worm is delivering them in a slow-release, water-stable form that synthetic fertilizers struggle to match. What we should have asked a century ago was not how do we remove these, but how do we get more? The second revelation is structural. Each casting is held together by a thin glue of polysaccharides and microbial residue produced in the worm's gut. That glue gives the casting an unusual property. It resists falling apart in water. In soil science, this is called aggregate stability, and it is one of the single most important measurements of healthy land. Soils rich in castings absorb rainfall faster, resist erosion longer, and hold moisture through droughts that would crack bare ground. A garden with visible casting activity is, almost by definition, a garden that is becoming more resilient. The third is microbial. A single gram of fresh casting can contain on the order of 1 billion microorganisms, and the community inside is not random. It is enriched in nitrogen-fixing bacteria, in actinomycetes that produce natural antibiotics, and fungi that suppress certain root diseases. Multiple agricultural trials have shown that applying vermicast to seedlings reduces damping off and certain soil-borne pathogens, not because the casting is sterile, but because it is alive in the right way. What we should have asked was not, is it clean, but is it the right kind of dirty? The fourth is hormonal. Castings have been shown to contain plant growth regulators, auxins, cytokinins, gibberellin-like compounds produced by the microbes inside them. In greenhouse trials, seedlings grown in soil amended with even small percentages of vermicast often germinate faster, root deeper, and resist transplant shock better than controls. The casting is not just food for the plant. It is, in a real sense, a chemical conversation between the worm's microbiome and the plant's roots. The fifth is architectural. Castings are not deposited at random. Many earthworm species, particularly the so-called anisic species like the common nightcrawler, build permanent vertical burrows that can descend more than 2 meters into the soil. They deposit their castings at the surface, around the burrow opening, forming those small towers. Those towers are not decoration. They are the visible mouths of an entire underground irrigation and aeration network. Water enters through them. Air enters through them. Plant roots follow the burrows down to depths they could not reach on their own. The sixth is planetary. Darwin estimated in 1881 that earthworms in an English pasture could pass somewhere around 10 tons of soil per acre through their bodies every year. Modern measurements in healthy systems have come back even higher. In some tropical and temperate sites, exceeding 40 tons of soil moved per acre annually. Multiply that by the worm-inhabited land surface of the planet, and the conclusion is almost vertiginous. The topsoil of the world is not a static thing. It is being continuously digested, rebuilt, and resurfaced, mostly by animals we have spent a century trying to flatten away. The seventh is temporal. The small towers in your lawn this morning were almost certainly not there yesterday. Castings are an active, ongoing signature. To see them is to be looking at work that was completed in the dark, possibly only hours ago by a creature you will probably never see. Their presence is not a flaw in your garden, it is a receipt. I have to admit, I believed the lie too, for most of my life. I remember as a child being handed a stiff broom and asked to sweep the worm casts off the front path before company arrived. I remember the small satisfaction of clean stone. I remember thinking, without ever quite forming the thought, that the lawn was the important thing, and the worms were a small embarrassment underneath it. I remember, years later, in my first garden, raking castings flat across the grass, because a book told me to. I did not know I was erasing the only honest report card my soil had ever written for me. When I finally read the actual numbers, the nitrogen multiples, the aggregate stability data, the tonnage Darwin had quietly measured in his own field, I had to put the book down. Not because the facts were complicated. They are not. But because the gap between what I had been taught and what was true was so wide and so old and so old and so unnecessary. Some lies are loud. This one was just inherited, passed quietly from gardener to gardener, century to century, with a broom in its hand. I no longer sweep them away. I look at them the way you look at a small monument someone has built in your honor, in the night, while you were asleep. So here is what I would like to ask you. The next time you walk into your yard, your allotment, the strip of grass beside your driveway, look down. Look for the small, crumbly towers. Look for the ones that weren't there yesterday. Resist, just for a moment, the very old urge to flatten them. Notice instead that someone has been working for you on the night shift, for free, for as long as you've owned that piece of ground, and probably for centuries before. And then tell me, in the comments, what your family taught you about worms and their castings. Were they treasured? Were they tolerated? Were they sprayed, raked, broomed, scolded? I want to hear the regional versions, the grandmother versions, the farm versions, the apartment balcony versions. The apartment balcony versions. Because we are unlearning this one together, and the stories matter as much as the science. What did your family teach you about this creature? Drop it below. We're unlearning together, and the next misconception we'll dismantle is even older, passed down for at least 9 generations. It's about something you touched today and didn't think twice about. Something so common, you don't even register it as alive. The lie around it is older than the lie around the worm. And once you see through it, your kitchen, your skin, and your bread will never look the same again.